"And here in the house of Elrond, more shall be made clear to you," said Aragorn, standing up. He cast his sword upon the table that stood before Elrond, and the blade was in two pieces. "Here is the sword that was broken," he said. "And who are you, and what have you to do with Minas Tirith?" asked Boromir, looking in wonder at the lean face of the ranger and his weather-stained cloak. "He is Aragorn, son of Arathorn," said Elrond, "and he is descended through many fathers from Isildur, Elendil's son of Minas Tirith. He is the chief of the Dúnedain in the north, and few now are left of that folk." What up, guys? Welcome back to Keep on Tolkien.
Welcome back, guys.
I'm Danny J.
This is Joel N.
And we're super excited about today's episode.
Yeah. We had recently finished our 3-part series on Kingdoms of the Dúnedain, and we more or less were using that as a lead up to this.
Because we wanted to explain in full context the gravity of this character. And that character, my friends, as you may have figured, is Aragorn II, son of Arathorn II.
Also known as Strider.
All right, so Aragorn, right? We may know Aragorn, but really, who is he, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about who he is.
Where did he come from?
So the main thing is he's the heir of Elendil by way of the line of Isildur. And as we'll learn a little bit later, technically an Aryan as well.
He's also the chieftain of the Dúnedain. He leads the remainder of the men from the northern kingdom of Arnor, and he is the 16th chieftain since the fall of Arnor.
And what else is he but a leader of men? Aragorn has led men in combat for over 60 years by the time of the War of the Ring. He's fought in Rohan and Gondor, he's fought in Umbar, and he led the Dúnedain in keeping the Shire and Bree safe for years.
Yeah, so he's really working behind the scenes. He's a member in the Council of Elrond. He's also a member of the Fellowship of the Ring.
And above all else, he is the rightful High King of both the Northern Kingdoms and the Southern Kingdoms.
Because he is the heir of the High King, Elendil himself.
Elendil. So Aragorn's one of those characters that's got
a lot of names.
So
he travels a lot. He's all over the place.
Yeah, and he's got names, he's like Gandalf. Like, everyone knows him by a different name.
I think he's traveled further than Gandalf. Well, unless you consider
the journey from Valinor. Joel.
Right. Well, I'm just in Middle-earth. Because Gandalf mostly stayed in the West, but Aragorn, as we'll find...
He goes everywhere.
Let's
start with Aragorn. Aragorn, and as we'll learn, he's Aragorn II. There's 2 Aragorns who are chieftains of the Dúnedain. He's named after his forefather, who was the 5th chieftain of the Dúnedain. And that name means revered king in Sindarin.
He's also known by the name Elessar, which is Quenya for Elfstone. And then he also goes by the name Edhelharn, which is the same Elfstone, but in Sindarin.
And in the common tongue, simply Elfstone. Some people in Bree call him Longshanks, and also Strider.
Strider is one of his widely used names as a ranger, specifically in the Breeland area.
Yeah, he's also known as Telcontar, which is the name of his house, eventually, which we'll get to in the end. But that actually means Strider in Quenya. He likes the name Strider, so he uses the Quenya translation as the name of his house, which is kind of funny.
It's kind of funny.
And
a little ode to the name.
Yeah, a little ode to like his past as a ranger. He's also known as Thorongil, which means Eagle of the Star.
Thorongil is almost more of an alias than a different name.
Right, yeah.
It's like altogether, it's when he puts on an act and tries to cover up his lineage. He also sometimes goes by the name Wingfoot. He's also been called the name Envinyatar, which means the renewer.
And Estel, which is his childhood name, like Yeshua for Jesus, right?
I didn't know either of those things.
Yeah, isn't that what they called Jesus when he was a kid, Yeshua?
I learned something new today, guys.
13 years of Catholic school, Joel.
Some of it had to seep out.
All right, so let's get into the early years of Aragorn. Let's get into Aragorn's childhood.
So Aragorn was born on March 1st in the Third Age year, 2931. He was the son of Arathorn II and Gilraen the Fair.
Yeah, and Gilraen means the wandering star in Sindarin. When Aragorn was 2 in the year 2933, his father Arathorn II is killed by an orc arrow. Shortly after that, Gilrain takes her son to Rivendell, and Elrond takes him in as a foster son, and gave him the name Estel, which means hope.
So Aragorn and Gilrain live together in Rivendell for quite some time, actually. Aragorn isn't actually told of his heritage until he is 21 years old. That's the year 2951.
Right. Imagine he thinks he's like, it's my 21st, bro. 21 shots. 21 shots. You
Here
know
we
what I
go.
mean? Here we go. Let's get drunk.
Talk about finding out about adult responsibilities.
Yeah, what a shitty 21st birthday.
By the way, when you get older, you're really going to have to take care of these kingdoms.
Yeah, I hope he was really drunk when
man.
I hope he was really drunk when Elrond told him about it. They were all drunk too. Elrond's like, you know what? I got something to show you. This is the shards of Narsil, man.
These are yours.
How'd you get those? These are yours, man. Yeah. So it
was probably some kind of reveling moment, very similar to that.
Very similar. That's exactly how it went down. Yeah, and that's in 2951, and that's when Elrond gives Aragorn the shards of Narsil and the Ring of Barahir,
our beloved object that we've been keeping track of.
Yeah, but he also withholds the scepter of Anúminas, which is the Northern Kingdom didn't wear crowns; they had a scepter, and that was the scepter of Anúminas.
Yeah,
and he withheld that from Aragorn until he should come into his right as king.
So Aragorn meets Arwen not very much later. Her full name, Arwen Undomniel, the daughter of Elrond. The two fall in love, and Gilrain, Aragorn's mother, notices the change in Aragorn. She tells him Elrond won't easily give his daughter's hand to any mortal man, and she starts to fear that the line of Isildur is going to end because there won't be any heirs. She tells him it's his fate to wander in the wild, and at that, I don't know if it's just an angsty moment for Aragorn, but he does just that, and he sets out.
All right, now we're going to read a little excerpt about, it's a sweet one. It's when Aragorn meets Arwen. For a moment, Aragorn gazed in silence, but fearing that she would pass away and never be seen again, he called to her, crying, Tinuviel, Tinuviel, even as Beren had done in the elder days long ago. Then the maiden turned to him and smiled and said, Who are you, and why do you call me by that name? And he answered, Because I believed you to be indeed Luthien Tinuviel, of whom I was singing. But if you are not she, then you walk in her likeness. Oh,
how beautiful.
Wow.
That's smooth.
That's
real smooth.
That's smooth. Oh, man. That's like running up to a girl on the street. Oh, shit, it's Jennifer Lawrence. Oh, no. I'm sorry. I thought you were Jennifer Lawrence for a second.
I mean, no offense to Jennifer Lawrence, but how are you comparing Luthien to Jennifer?
I'm just thinking of somebody that people think is hot.
I mean, I don't know. I guess I always imagined Luthien to be just beyond description.
No, I mean, she totally is. I was just making a joke.
Unacceptable.
Sorry.
Unacceptable.
All right, so yeah, after Aragorn falls in love with dearest Arwen, and he has that short conversation with his mother, he sets out into the wild and becomes the ranger he was born to be.
Yeah, this is when he first starts doing his ranger stuff. He assumes the role as chieftain of the Dúnedain. As Dúnedain, he joins the other rangers and they guard what is left of the people of the North Kingdom from the threats of the northern Misty Mountains.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like old evil shit left over from Angmar up there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's evil shit all over the mountains.
All over the mountains.
And this is when Aragorn picks up the name Strider by the locals.
And shortly after that, Aragorn meets Gandalf the Grey in 2956 of the Third Age. And they become really good friends and allies right away. And on the advice of Gandalf, this is when the Dúnedain begin to keep renewed watch over the region known as the Shire, where all the hobbits are living.
So a year or so after that, this is when Aragorn takes on his alias name known as Thorongil.
Yeah, the Thorongil years. That's what it says on the outline.
The Thorongil years. This is when he takes on his alias and he runs around and does all sorts of badass stuff.
Yeah, and that's from TA 2957 to TA 2980. So it's quite a while he's doing this.
Right, 23 years. He's just out doing some badass stuff. So what has he been doing? So he takes on the name Thorongil, and he served in the armies of both King Thengel, that's the father of Theoden, so he's the current king of Rohan at the time, and he also served in the armies of Ecthelion II, the current steward of Gondor, who is actually Denethor's father. And the name Thorongil, by the way, fun fact,
Eagle of the Star.
means Eagle of the Star. And yeah, so during this time while he's serving for these armies, this is when he gains a lot of his experience in combat and leadership, because he's leading a lot of these men.
Yeah, he's essentially become a kind of a rival to the favor of the kings. Like the men really gravitate toward him on the battlefield, and they look to him for leadership.
Yeah, a natural characteristic of the man who is the rightful heir to the throne. He's just a king by birth.
Yeah, it's just in his blood. And so he wrote a lot with the Rohirrim, and but the culmination of the Thorongil years is in TA 2980, when Thorongil led a small fleet of Gondor ships to the rebel province of Umbar. And as we talked about in the last couple episodes, Umbar is a former Númenórean colony populated by the descendants of the Kingsmen, who hated the faithful and the Eldar.
Yeah, they become later known, after the fall of Númenor, they become known as the Black Númenóreans, because they're Númenóreans, but they're assholes.
Yeah, and they worship Melkor, and they serve Sauron, and they're dicks.
Yeah, so Thorongil and that Gondorian fleet just utterly destroy the Corsairs down there and burn most of their ships. Thorongil actually slew their ruler in single combat.
Yeah, on the havens in Umbar.
Talk about a badass moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, so after that victory in Umbar, Thorongil, he refuses to come back to Minas Ithil.
Well, yeah, because he's a rock star now. Like,
right.
The men are like, come back to the city, and the king will give you all this, and we'll party, and you'll be great.
Right, and he's trying to keep a low profile.
Yeah. So he refuses to go back to Minas Tirith, and he abandons the field of battle and travels into the east, never to be heard from again, as Thorongil at least.
Yeah, one of the issues that Aragorn faced throughout a lot of his life, why he kind of avoided the throne in Gondor, is because of the recent kin strifes that had been going on. And
which we talked about in the last episode.
Yeah, if you go back to the last episode, Gondor was just totally ravaged with fighting and kin strifes for a long time. There was like civil war within it, with people fighting over who was the ruler. And he really wanted to avoid that, because he knew that if Gondor was going to last, they needed to stay united. So he tried to keep a low profile so that there wasn't any issues or rivalry over who was going to be a ruler. He didn't want to start another civil war.
Right, yeah. And he knew that, like, in this time, like, that's the thing about Aragorn, is he always knows that unity is more important than who's leading.
Right.
Like, it's about what we're doing together as a unit rather than who is leading the unit. So he knows that it's more important for people to stand united against Sauron than who the leader is.
Yeah, I wonder if that characteristic is something he got from being one of the Rangers, because that kind of describes the Rangers.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does describe the Rangers in a nutshell, yeah.
I mean, the Rangers may have a chieftain, but they don't have, like, a ruling king, really.
Right, yeah. And it's more about what the Rangers do than who the Rangers are, right?
As a whole,
Yeah.
right. Anyway, off topic.
After Aragorn's tenure as Thorongil, he makes his way down to the Forest of Lothlorien later in that year, 2980.
Yeah, after he decides not to go back to Minas Tirith, he decides to basically just run over to Lothlorien and lay low there for a while. And while he's there, he meets Arwen again, and Círdan and Amroth.
Yeah, and this is when he does something that I did not know that Aragorn did. And that's he gives her the heirloom of his house, my favorite artifact, the Ring of Barahir. So during the War of the Ring, he's not wearing the Ring of Barahir. I never knew that.
Was that a proposal in that moment?
Yes, and that was the sign of betrothal. So like in the movie, they change it up with her jewel that she gives him, like the Evenstar jewel is kind of like the symbol of betrothal. But in the book, he gives the Ring of Barahir to her.
That's a pretty badass engagement ring. Holy shit.
Yeah, and this gesture is deeply symbolic because the ring goes back from the house of Barahir to the house of Finarfin, who Arwen is a descendant of, being a daughter of Galadriel. Or being a daughter of Galadriel's daughter, excuse me.
Right, because Aragorn is ultimately a descendant of Barahir.
Right, the direct descendant, yeah.
So originally the ring was gifted from the house of Finarfin to Barahir as a thanks and now it just made its way back from the House of Barahir to the House of Finarfin again.
Yeah, and this
through
ring
an
is
engagement.
the ring is always a sign of an oath too. Like it's always like
Right.
when Finrod gives it to Barahir, it's I'm gonna swear this oath to you that I'll help you out no matter what, at any time, essentially. And then he gives it as a sign of his love and commitment as a wedding ring, as a betrothal gift.
Wasn't it also used as an oath by one of the kings of the Northern Kingdom to those northern men?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, he said,
As thanks.
Arvidui. Yeah, King Arvidui.
Yeah, he was driven up to the wild north areas by the Witch King.
Yeah.
By the Witch King. And some of the wild Northmen up there saved him. And as a gift, he gave them the Ring of Barahir. And he's like, this may not amount to much, but if you bring it to my people, like
it's huge.
It's huge. This will do much for you. It was basically an oath of aid to them when they need it.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, like we said, Arwen, she pledges her hand in marriage. And in this instance, she also renounces her elven lineage and accepts the fate of men. Death.
A lot like Luthien Tenuvio did.
Yes, exactly. And that's the whole thing about Aragorn and Arwen is like they're Beren and Luthien Part 2.
Basically, yeah.
They're the culmination of the union of elves and men.
So a few years later, Gilraen, Aragorn's mother, leaves Rivendell to live alone among her people up in the Eriador region. It's not exactly said where. We don't think that she stayed in any like major settlements or anything. She just kind of went off to live out in a rural area.
Yeah, like a hermitage, essentially. She just kind of wanted to live the rest of her days alone. Because she never recovered from the death of Arathorn. It was like...
Oh, yeah?
It was bad for her, yeah. She's constantly sorrowful from that point on. Like, yeah.
Pretty sad life.
Mm-hmm. And then she's just watching her son, shoulder this huge responsibility, and like it all lies on him to like continue the line of Isildur and all this. And
she's afraid that it's not going to continue now with Arwen because she doesn't think they're going to be able to have kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can imagine she's a little stressed.
Yeah.
So the years after that is when Aragorn sets out for more ranger adventures.
Yeah, and this little bit of adventures isn't really known in Tolkien. It's kind of briefly mentioned by Aragorn.
Yeah, it's just a large chunk of time where he's just out doing his Aragorn Dúnedain Ranger stuff.
And at this time, it's thought that he traveled through the mines of Moria to Harad.
Because he mentions having done that.
Yes.
We know that he does that, and it's thought that this is when he does that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he says, I traveled to Harad, where the stars are strange.
Right, that's pretty far away.
Yeah, when your stars are completely different, you've gone far.
And that's why I think he's gone further than Gandalf has. Because Gandalf generally sticks like right around the Middle-earth region, because, I mean, he's trying to stick it with the Edain that are left.
Right, yeah.
And the elves that are there dealing with Sauron.
Mm-hmm.
Sauron wasn't out that way.
Yeah, the two blue wizards were the ones that were supposed to go east and south,
and they disappeared.
Yeah.
Nobody knows what the fuck they did.
Aragorn eventually takes a little bit of time out of his adventures after that to go visit Mama up in Eriador.
Because it's been a while.
It's been a while since
after he does his unknown adventures.
So
and
that's in 3006. So the last time you saw her, let's see, what year was that? Last time you saw her was in 2980, right?
So it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been 26 years. Yeah.
Yeah, almost 30 years.
Yeah, and at this meeting, she's quite somber, and she references her own death. She's foretelling her own death, essentially. So her and Aragorn, he departs in sadness because he's pretty sure he's never going to see his mom again.
Yeah, that's pretty depressing.
Mm-hmm. And later in the spring of TA 3007, Gilraen dies at the age of 100 years old.
Exactly.
Which is not super old for a Dúnedain.
No.
And
at that's a pretty hard blow on Aragorn, but he just resumes his role as chieftain of the Dúnedain and keeps on going because he's a leader and that's what he does. So a couple of years later, in the year 3009, this is when Gandalf approaches him for the first time with his suspicions of the origin of Bilbo's ring. And this is when he enlists Aragorn to help him hunt down Gollum.
The hunt for Gollum begins.
Yeah, he travels all over the place. He travels over a lot of Rhovanion, and he uses his tracking abilities. He goes through the dead marshes, but he did this for what? Didn't we say it was like 30 years?
No, 8 years.
8 years. I'm sorry, that's way off.
From 3009 to he eventually captures Gollum in 3018. So for 9 years,
He's running around looking for
Aragorn
Gollum.
wandered the wilderness looking for Gollum.
But eventually, after he essentially said he almost gave up, and he was on his way back to Rivendell or Eregion or somewhere around there, and he comes across Gollum just by like chance, and he finally gets him, and they take him over to Thranduil's halls in northern Mirkwood.
And as he said, I was not gentle. He says that to Frodo at one point in the book. I wasn't too gentle.
I mean, I wouldn't be either. He's a slimy little
Gollum's
shit.
gross, yeah. Beat him up. He deserves it.
So while he's in Thranduil's halls, this is when Gandalf questions him. Aragorn lets Gandalf know that he's finally caught up with him, and Gandalf stops what he's doing. If you want to know what Gandalf was doing, refer to our episode 16. We talk all about Gandalf.
Yes, we do, yeah.
And Gandalf gets a lot of information out of him about the ring and a little bit about Mordor, too. Good information.
And he essentially gets the information like that the enemy knows, right? He essentially finds out what the enemy knows about the ring.
Yeah, not only does it more or less confirm his suspicions that the Bilbo's ring is the ring, but he also finds out that now the enemy has also been pursuing the same ring and knows where it is.
Right.
Yeah. Big reveal. Aragorn helped him find that. And after that, Aragorn returns to the north to keep watch over the Shire because shit is going down over there right now.
Right.
The ring wraiths are all over the place. And there's spies and, yeah, not good. Got to have the Rangers around.
On May 1st, 3018 of the Third Age, Aragorn meets Gandalf at Sarn Ford. Sarn Ford is like it's a river crossing in the north, and it's like a ranger camp where rangers hang out. And he tells Aragorn and Frodo about Frodo's plan to leave the Shire.
Yeah, so this is when Aragorn gets let in on what's going on.
He knows that they're about to be on the road.
Which is also why he is able to recognize Frodo and what's going on while they meet up in Bree.
Mm-hmm. Which is exactly what happens next on September 29th. So a few months later, Aragorn meets Frodo and the hobbits at the Inn of the Prancing Pony.
By total chance.
And Frodo learns from Butterbur that he's somebody called Strider. What his right name is, I never heard. But round here, they call him Strider.
So this is when the hobbits reluctantly agree to take him on as their guide. And Frodo only trusts him after he reads Gandalf's letter that Butterbur totally fucking forgot to mail.
Yeah,
but finally gets to read.
We talked about that in the Gandalf episode, didn't we?
Yeah, that was a mess. Fucking Butterbur. But from there, they set out from Bree on September 30th on their way out to Rivendell. And a few days after leaving Bree, the company comes across some strange flashes of light coming from the direction of Amon Sul. That looked like lightning, but there wasn't really thunder. It was
a lot of flashing.
It was strange. They didn't know at the time, but that was actually Gandalf battling the Nazgul up on the watchtower of Amon Sul, which they would later come to.
Yeah, on October 6th, actually, just a week or so later, right? Yeah, September 30th to October 6th. That's exactly a week, isn't it?
They were a few days into that week when they saw it, but...
Oh, okay. Yeah, so on October 6th, the company decides to camp at Amon Sul, which they call Weathertop. And they are attacked by 5 Nazgul during the night. Frodo is stabbed with the Morgul knife of the Witch King, and Aragorn fights the Nazgul.
Uses an awesome torch.
Yeah, fire.
So from there, Aragorn and the company make it out to Rivendell as fast as they can, and that's when we get the flight to the Ford. On October 13th, Aragorn finds a greenstone near the Last Bridge. It's actually called the Last Bridge.
Yeah, it's actually called the Last Bridge.
That's the name of the bridge, but it's because it's the final bridge you have to go over on your way.
Into the wild, right?
Yeah, out east, yep. And he takes that as a sign that the bridge is safe to cross, because they know at this point that there are ring wraiths everywhere, and they're super worried about that. Mm-hmm. And so he takes it as a sign that there aren't any ring wraiths on the other side, it's safe to cross. And it turns out that stone was actually left there 2 days earlier by Glorfindel. Because he ran into the Nazgul there and drove them off. Because Glorfindel can do that. The Nazgul are straight afraid of Glorfindel. Right. If you'll remember back to the episodes about Arnor and Gondor that we talked about, Glorfindel actually directly confronts the Witch King.
Yeah.
And they're like enemies.
Yeah,
so,
they do not like each other.
Yeah, so the rest of the ring wraiths, I can imagine they don't like Glorfindel very much at all.
And if you remember back from past episodes, Glorfindel is actually an emissary of the Valar themselves, sent back. So he's He's like
A beefed up elf.
yeah, he's a beefed up elf, but he's a representative of the gods, really.
But ultimately, on October 20th, Frodo crosses the ford. He crosses the River Brunnen and finally enters Rivendell. Super wounded, but he gets there.
Mm-hmm.
And not long after that, that's when we have the Council of Elrond.
So the main thing, like, we covered the Council of Elrond in 2 whole episodes a few episodes back. So check out that if you want to know literally everything that happens or most of what happens in the chapter.
The Council of Elrond is such a badass chapter.
Yeah, it's nerd porn.
There's so much information there. We're not going to jump into it here. Obviously, we've covered it, but we're going to throw out some badass shit that happens with Aragorn.
Yeah, the Aragorn related stuff. And at the Council of Elrond, he presents the shards of Narsil and declares his lineage. And he also says that he means to go to Minas Tirith to aid in their struggles against Mordor.
That's not something they touched on much in the films. It was more or less he just stood up and said, "Here I am."
Yeah, they didn't. That whole original plan to go to Minas Tirith, yeah, because the original plan was to bring the ring there too, right? Or at least they considered doing that.
They considered doing that, yeah. But I mean, here he's actually presenting the shards of Narsil.
Yeah,
and totally like explaining where he comes from.
And he also explains the role of the Rangers of the North and the struggle they play against Sauron. We got a little excerpt here we're going to read for you.
"And yet less thanks we have than you. Travelers scowl at us, and countrymen give us scornful names. Strider I am to one fat man who lives within a day's march of foes that would freeze his heart or lay his little town to ruin if he were not guarded ceaselessly. Yet we would not have it otherwise. If simple folk are free from care and fear, simple they will be, and we must be secret to keep them so. That has been the task of my kindred, while the years have lengthened and the grass has grown."
Yeah, that's a cool quote.
Yeah, he was rebuttaling to Boromir.
Yeah, because Boromir's whining about how nobody's helping us fight the enemy.
And then he stands up and he's like, "And yet, I'm a ranger, and less thanks we have than you guys down in Gondor. People don't even fucking know that we exist."
Yeah, they just give us weird nicknames. Strider, one who strides. Like, he strides. That's what we'll call him, Strider.
Smooth.
So
after the council, while he's still in Rivendell, that's actually when they reforged the Sword of Elendil, and it is renamed from Narsil to Andúril,
the
Flame of the West.
And they know that Sauron will still fear that blade.
Oh yeah, especially renewed.
Oh yeah, a dwarven blade upgraded by the elves of Rivendell.
Yeah, I never really thought about that. Yeah, because the blade itself was made by Telkar
back in the
first age,
mm-hmm.
And unfortunately his things sort of break. For Telkar is known as like the best dwarven smith, one of the best smiths period
yeah.
to ever live.
But
and
his
yet,
stuff is always
multiple of his swords and daggers and things break.
Yeah.
But I mean, reforged by the elves, by the Noldor, I can only imagine how badass this thing must be now.
Oh yeah.
And that brings us into the Fellowship, because that right after they end the council and while they're still in Rivendell, this is when we get the Fellowship of the Ring put together.
Aragorn agrees to join the company, taking the ring to Mordor. He ultimately plans to go to Minas Tirith with Boromir eventually, though. And the members of the company include Gandalf the Grey, Aragorn, Boromir of Gondor, Frodo Baggins,
Samwise Gamgee, Meriadoc Brandybuck, Peregrine Took, Gimli son of Gloin of the Lonely Mountain, and Legolas of Mirkwood, son of Thranduil.
Yeah, and that's pretty much a whole representative of the free peoples, right?
Yeah, you've got someone from pretty much everywhere of the major peoples around
mm-hmm.
Middle Earth at that time.
You even got a Maiar with you,
right? Little did they know, and also they've got that magical number again, 9.
That deeply significant number 9 to match 9 riders, just like the 9 ships that Elendil took from Numenor.
Just like the 9 Seeing Stones. Or 7.
7 Seeing Stones. But 7's
false.
the other number. 7's another number that's everywhere. 7 Sons of Fëanor, 7 Seeing Stones. You know.
7 everything.
7 everything.
7 things. So after the development of the Fellowship, they head south for the former realm of Eregion, now called Holland by men, but it was previously an elven area. It was a holdout of the Noldor.
Yeah, that
back
was
during the Second Age.
yeah back Aragian. That was where Celebrimbor was lord of. And they made
That's
the
where
rings.
the Rings of Power were made, right?
Yeah, in
Obviously
in
not the
Aragian.
one, but
The 3 elven rings. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I suppose they did make the one ring was made in Mordor, but Sauron came and helped. Yeah, so even the other ones were made in Aragian.
yeah.
Yeah.
The other 7 and 9. So they make for the pass of Caradhras. That's their reason for going down there, because there's the pass of Caradhras, which will take them over the Misty Mountains towards where they're trying to go.
Right. It's like the southern pass of the Misty Mountains. There's
Right.
the High Pass, which is the one that Bilbo and the dwarves took during The Hobbit.
Yeah, it's kind of associated with the Great East Road, isn't it?
Yep. And then the southern pass is Caradhras.
So while they're trying to go over this pass, their path is completely cut off by blizzard, like just totally built up with snow they can't get by.
Except for Legolas can walk on the top of the snow.
That's right.
Dude, I would have been like, if I were Boromir, I'd have been like, you carry the hobbits.
Yeah, what are we doing here?
Because let's look at the math here. So he, as a person, can stand on top of the snow, right?
Right.
So by that logic, with a hobbit in his arms, he would only sink a few inches into the snow, right? Or maybe a foot.
I guess I'm not quite sure how that shit works. But I mean,
I don't
maybe
know.
he could carry like as many hobbits as he could carry, and he'd still walk on top of the snow. Maybe I don't know
it's-
what the stipulations of snow walking are. So
I don't know. Is it elf magic? I don't know.
I assumed it had to have been some kind of elf magic.
I just think I don't know. Maybe they're really light. Maybe their bones are hollow like
But
birds.
I mean, the hobbits are light too. They would have been able to. They've even got bigger feet. Hobbits would have totally been able to walk on the snow
My current theory,
if it was a physics thing.
my theory is that elf bones are hollow like birds. That's fact.
We're gonna go ahead and say that's fact. So after not being able to cross the pass of Caradhras due to all of this snow and weather, they face the difficult choice of going through the Gap of Rohan, which they know isn't a good idea at this point because
That's right by Isengard.
that's right by Isengard. That's where Saruman is, and they already know that Saruman has betrayed them. They
Yep.
don't want to go there.
Don't want to go there.
So they face the tough choice of having to go under the mountains through the ancient mines of Moria,
The kingdom of Khazad-dûm.
which was coincidentally one of the original kingdoms of the dwarves of Durin, which is where
Oh yeah, ancient kingdom.
that's where Gimli comes from. He's one of the Durin.
Yeah,
Durin's
Durin's
folk.
folk. Yeah.
So this is part of his lineage, and he is not opposed to going there. He actually wants to go there to try to find Balin.
Well,
his uncle.
because the reason why the dwarves were at the Council of Elrond was because they had lost contact with the people that went to reclaim Moria, right?
Right, to replaying Khazad-dûm. So reluctantly, the company decides to take that road through the mines against Aragorn's advice. He didn't
Aragorn's
want
not
to go.
happy about it. Yeah, he's like, I do this in full dissent. Like I did not want to do this.
He outwardly mentions about having been there once before, and he was not eager to ever go back.
Go back. They're like, why don't you want to go? I was there already once.
It was rough.
It was rough. And Aragorn's like the most badass mofo around. And you're
Right.
like, if he's like, I don't want to go back there, guys.
This guy has led multiple armies and attacks. He's a shipmaster too. Like he's gone everywhere, and he's a ranger. He's not afraid of stuff, and he does not want to go back to Moria.
No.
Like that's not a good sign.
And yeah, that's where we're going to leave you at for the Aragorn profile part 1, guys. We're going to get into the mines of Moria and the rest of what happens in our next episode. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, guys.
Yeah.
Tune in next time, and let's because this is going to be epic.
Yeah, this has been fun. I love Aragorn. So, and I know a lot of you guys do too.
Yeah, so tune in and let's finish hearing about his story.
Yeah. All right, guys. That's it for us. I'm Danny J.
And this is Joel N. Keep on talking, guys.
Keep on talking. Aure in Tulaba.